sound of wind howling, a distant bell tolls. Welcome back to Street Tales Podcast, the place where every shadow holds a secret. Tonight we journey back in time, to the foggy, forgotten heart of Europe in 1930. Picture this: a lone manor, silhouetted against a bruised sky on the desolate moors. This is Durness Hall. Its name is a whisper, a ghost on the wind. But behind its grand velvet balcony lies a story steeped in blood, sorrow, and a deafening silence. We are about to push open those heavy oak doors and step inside. Prepare yourselves for Blood on the Velvet Balcony, a classic Gothic horror of twisted love, bitter betrayal, and a family curse that has clawed its way through generations, refusing to die. Are you ready? Let the darkness in. If you enjoy tales that linger long after the lights go out, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Now, listen closely. The story is beginning. The year was 1930. The last carriage of the day sighed over the damp cobblestones, its wheels rolling toward the silhouette of Durness Hall. Inside, I pressed my gloved hand to the cold glass, watching the fog swallow the iron gates. I had been summoned. My distant uncle, Lord Durness, whose failing health was a whisper in every corner of the county, had sent for me. The letter was brief, urgent, and sealed with crimson wax. It simply said, "Come at once, Eleanor. The house needs you." The driver, a gruff old man, turned his head. "We'll reach the hall in a minute, miss," he muttered. "Best keep your scarf tight. The wind's off the marsh, cut to the bone." But my attention was already captured by the decaying manor ahead. Its balconies sagged like tired shoulders, and the air smelled faintly of rain and old roses. The carriage halted. As I stepped out, the great oak doors swung open as if expecting me. A woman stood in the dim glow of the hall, tall and severe, her black gown melting into the shadows. "Miss Vale," she said without a hint of a smile. "Welcome to Durness Hall. I am Mrs. Harrow, the housekeeper. His lordship is resting. He will see you in the morning." I followed her into an immense hall lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow my every move. A chandelier trembled in the draught, and somewhere deep inside, a clock chimed 9 times, each note echoing longer than the last. As we ascended the grand staircase, one painting, larger than the rest, caught my eye. It was a woman seated on a balcony, her gown a deep, dark velvet, her eyes an unnatural shade of green. A faint sheen glimmered at the corner of her mouth, like fresh blood. "Who is she?" I asked quietly. Mrs. Harrow's back went stiff. "That, miss, is Lady Rosalind Durness, the late lord's wife. She passed some years ago." "She looks so lifelike," I murmured. "She was," the housekeeper replied, "to her misfortune." Mrs. Harrow led me to my chamber. "If you need anything, ring the bell," she instructed, her voice low. "But do not wander the corridors at night. The house is old, and it plays tricks on the unwary." Before I could ask what she meant, she vanished into the shadows. My room was elegant but draped in melancholy. I noticed a set of glass doors leading to a narrow balcony. The velvet drapes were the same deep red as in the portrait. I opened the doors, and for a fleeting instant I thought I saw a pale, luminous figure standing on the balcony opposite. I blinked, and it was gone. "Just missed," I told myself. Later, as I lay in bed, a soft whisper seemed to drift through the room. "Eleanor." I sat up sharply. "Who's there?" I called out, but only silence answered. I tried to calm my racing heart, telling myself it was just the old house breathing. But then I saw it. The velvet drapes by the balcony moved, ever so slightly, even though the doors were latched, and I caught the faintest scent in the air. Something metallic, like rust or blood. The next morning, I met my uncle. He sat huddled in a chair, frail but with alert eyes. "Eleanor," he rasped, "you came." "Of course, Uncle," I started. But he cut me off. "The house called for you," he whispered. "It has a will of its own. It remembers the blood it was built upon. The Durness name is bound to this hall, and to her, to Rosalind." "Your late wife?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "She lingers still. You may have seen her balcony, the one with the velvet awning. She never truly left it." A chill crawled down my spine. "You mean her spirit?" His eyes bored into mine. "Spirit, curse, memory, call it what you will. But know this, the balcony bleeds when the moon wanes. Always then, always velvet, always blood." Suddenly, his gaze fixed on something over my shoulder. I turned and froze. On the wall hung another portrait of Lady Rosalind, but this one was different. The crimson of her gown seemed almost wet, and from her lips a streak of something darker glistened, running down the canvas. Blood. It reached the bottom of the frame and began to drip onto the floor. One drop, then another. The housekeeper, Mrs. Harrow, appeared at the door, her face white as bone. "Miss Vale, come away. Now!" As she pulled me from the room, my uncle whispered, his voice almost lost in the crackle of the fire, "She's awake." That night the wind howled. The velvet drapes stirred, and from somewhere deep within Durness Hall, a woman's laughter, low, sweet, and sorrowful, echoed through the corridors until dawn. What have I walked into? What does this house want from me? I have a feeling I'm about to find out. If you want to know what happens next, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next part of the story. Thanks for watching. Hello, and welcome back to our story. If you're just joining us, be sure to catch up on what happened when Eleanor first arrived at the chilling Durness Hall. The next morning dawned gray, as if the sun itself hesitated to touch the manor. The mist from the marshes crept close, pressing its pale fingers against every window pane. Inside, the corridors smelled of damp velvet and burnt tallow. Eleanor woke late, her sleep fractured by strange dreams she couldn't quite recall, faces emerging from fog, the sound of dripping water, and a woman humming softly beyond her door. Lying still, she listened. The house was never silent. It murmured and sighed as though its very stones remembered centuries of sorrow. Then a sharp knock. "Miss Vale," Mrs. Harrow's voice called, flat and composed as ever. "Breakfast, if you please." Eleanor dressed quickly, her footsteps echoing too loudly in the hush as she descended the stairs. She couldn't shake the image of the painting, the one that had bled. A trick of the mind, or something else? The memory of that dark crimson trail haunted her. In the breakfast room, Mrs. Harrow waited, her posture rigid. "His lordship?" Eleanor asked. "Still resting," Mrs. Harrow replied. "The master's illness is of the spirit, not the flesh." "You mean grief?" "Something older than grief," the housekeeper said, pouring tea. "Older and less forgiving." Eleanor gathered her courage. "Mrs. Harrow, when my uncle spoke of Lady Rosalind, he said she never left." "What did he mean?" The housekeeper's hand froze. "Best not to dwell on such things, miss. The mistress met her end many years ago. A fall from the balcony. Accidental, so they say." "So they say." Mrs. Harrow's lips tightened. "She died on a night much like this one will be. Fog thick as wool, the moon red as rust. Some claim she was pushed, others that she leapt. The velvet of her balcony was once white, you know. It turned crimson that same night, and has never been clean again." Just then, the faintest sound drifted from beyond the dining hall. 3 slow, deliberate knocks from somewhere below the floor. The housekeeper went pale. "You will excuse me, miss," she said, rising abruptly. She disappeared down the corridor without another word. Eleanor sat still, her heart thudding. When the sound didn't repeat, she stood and followed. The corridor led to a narrow stair spiraling into the depths of the manor. At its base was a heavy door, half open. The air grew colder with every step. Down in a low stone passage, lamps burned weakly. And then she heard it. A whisper, so faint it could have been the wind. Eleanor. Her blood ran cold. She turned. The passage behind her was empty. Beside an overturned crate, something glinted. She knelt and lifted it, a brooch shaped like a rose, its silver tarnished, with a tiny stone the color of dried blood in its center. The moment her fingers closed around it, the lamps flickered. Then, from the shadows beneath the stairs came a soft, wet, unmistakable sound. Dripping. A thread of red liquid ran along the stone floor, pooling near her shoes. The scent was metallic, sharp, real. She staggered back as something moved under the stairs, a faint rustle like silk brushing stone. Eleanor turned and fled. Back in the main hall, Mrs. Harrow stood, her expression unreadable. "You went below." "I heard something," Eleanor gasped. "There's blood under the stairs." "There is always blood under these stairs," the housekeeper said calmly. "You must learn which sounds to heed and which to forget, Miss Vale, if you wish to survive the nights here." She took the brooch from Eleanor's trembling hand. Best not to touch what belongs to the dead. That evening, as rain battered the windows, Eleanor found herself drawn back to the portraits. She stood before the painting of Lady Rosalind. The surface now appeared dry, but she noticed something new. Words etched faintly into the frame. "Sancta non dormiunt in pace." "The holy do not sleep in peace," she whispered. Behind her, a door creaked open. Her uncle stood at the top of the grand staircase, his skin nearly translucent. "The house has spoken to you already, hasn't it?" he rasped. "The Durness line is cursed, Eleanor. And now that you are here, it will not let you go. You must leave before the new moon. Promise me." Before she could answer, the chandelier above the dining room crashed violently. The wind howled, and from the west tower a woman's scream ripped through the air. Eleanor ran toward the sound, up the spiral staircase to a long, shadowy corridor. The screaming had been replaced by low sobbing. At the end of the hall, the door to the velvet balcony stood ajar. "Hello?" she called. The sobbing stopped. Inside, the air smelled of dead roses. A young maid was slumped near the balcony doors, her uniform soaked in something dark. Across her neck ran a long, shallow cut. The maid's lips trembled. She wanted the brooch. Then her eyes rolled back. Mrs. Harrow appeared, her face a mask of stone. "Take her to the kitchen," she ordered the servants who followed. To Eleanor, she said, "You should not have come here. The balcony was hers. It will not suffer another woman's presence." Eleanor stared at the velvet awning beyond the doors. Upon its surface glistened small, dark red droplets. "Blood," she breathed. Mrs. Harrow nodded grimly. It has begun again. That night, sleep was impossible. As Eleanor sat by the fire, the shadows on the wall seemed to take the shape of a woman's silhouette. Thunder rolled, and from the direction of the balcony came the soft sound of footsteps. She turned toward the window. The drapes stirred. A pale, bloodless hand slid briefly between the curtains before vanishing. Eleanor's voice trembled. "Lady Rosalind." Silence. Then a whisper, faint as a sigh. "The blood remembers." The candle went out. What will happen to Eleanor now that the spirit of Durness Hall has her in its sights? Thank you for listening, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for the next chilling chapter. Stay safe, and we'll see you again soon. The storm passed by morning, leaving a silence that felt heavier than thunder. Durness Hall glistened under a film of rain, its stones dark and slick. The marshland below was drowned in fog, and a lone crow perched on the weather vane cried hoarsely into the still air. I rose from my bed as though waking from a long fever. My dreams had been filled with that whisper again, that same soft, feminine voice calling my name as though through water. When I looked toward the balcony, the drapes were motionless, but a faint metallic scent still hung in the air. On my dressing table lay something that hadn't been there before. A rose. Its petals were dark red, almost black, and damp to the touch. No vase, no stem, just the flower itself, resting on the polished wood like an offering. My heart clenched. I thought of the brooch taken from me the day before, the one shaped like a rose. The resemblance was perfect. A knock startled me. It was Mrs. Harrow, the housekeeper, her expression unreadable. "His lordship requests your presence in the library, Miss Vale." I hesitated. "How is the maid, the one who was hurt last night?" The housekeeper's tone was flat. "She will recover. She will not speak of what she saw." "Because she's afraid." Mrs. Harrow's eyes flicked toward the balcony. "Because the dead dislike gossip." I followed her through the corridor past rows of portraits whose eyes seemed to follow me. The scent of damp velvet clung to everything. When we reached the library, Lord Durness was seated by the window, swathed in blankets, his face ashen. Books lay scattered around him. "You've seen her now, haven't you?" he rasped without turning his head. I swallowed. "I saw something. I don't know what." "You do know," he said quietly. "She has chosen you. You carry her likeness, her voice, her eyes. The house remembers. It mistakes you for her." I stepped closer. "Uncle, what happened to Lady Rosalind? I want the truth." He looked up, and for the first time I saw raw fear in his eyes. "She died on that balcony. But she did not fall. She was taken. The house demanded blood that night, her blood. It demanded it again years later, when the maids began to vanish." I shivered. "And now it demands mine." He nodded slowly. "Every generation, the curse stirs when the moon wanes. I thought it would end with me, but the house is older than my guilt." He coughed violently. When he spoke again, his voice was a whisper. "There is a room she used to keep locked. At the end of the north corridor. Do not go there. Promise me." But curiosity already burned in my mind. "What's in that room?" He closed his eyes. "Mirrors. Too many mirrors." By late afternoon, the fog thickened, pressing its ghostly weight against the windows. The servants moved quietly, their faces pale. I wandered the upper floor, my steps carrying me almost unconsciously toward the forbidden corridor. At the very end stood a door unlike the others, its handle tarnished, its surface carved with roses and serpents. The mirror room. My hand trembled as I turned the knob. Inside, the room was vast and circular, the walls lined entirely with mirrors. At the center stood a single velvet chair, its surface faintly damp, as though someone had just risen from it. I stepped inside. The door shut softly behind me. The mirrors multiplied my reflection 100-fold. Every flicker of fear stared back. I moved closer to one of the larger mirrors. My reflection looked pale, uncertain. Then it smiled. I gasped and stumbled back. The reflection's mouth curled upward, though my own remained still. Its eyes darkened. "Rosalind," I whispered. The reflection tilted its head. One by one, the other mirrors began to fog over, except for the central one. In its depths, I saw a figure standing just behind my shoulder, a woman in a velvet gown. I spun around. The room was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, the woman was closer, her face pale, her mouth curved in a sad, knowing smile. Blood ran from the corner of her lips. "Why do you haunt this house?" I whispered. "What do you want from me?" Cold fingers brushed the back of my neck. I turned, choking back a scream, but there was no one there, only the faint echo of a voice. "The blood remembers." The mirrors shuddered. Cracks rippled across their surfaces, splitting my reflection into 100 fragments. I fled, the door slamming shut behind me. I ran until I reached the staircase, gripping the banister. Mrs. Harrow stood at the foot of the stairs, her expression grim. You went where you were told not to go, she said. Now she knows you entirely. What is she? I demanded. A ghost? A curse? A memory? Perhaps all three, said Mrs. Harrow, but understand this. The house feeds on remembrance. Every time you speak her name, you give her breath. My voice broke. Then how do I stop it? You don't, she said softly. You endure it. That night, Lord Durness lay feverish, calling out for his dead wife. I sat by my fire, unable to rest. The rose on my dressing table had crumbled into dust. As I stared into the hearth, I saw movement reflected in the glass of the window. A woman standing on the balcony. I rose and approached slowly. The figure raised her head, and in the dim light I saw my own face staring back, pale, hollow-eyed, lips red with blood. I screamed and stumbled away, knocking over the candle. Darkness swallowed the room, and from the balcony came the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps crossing the velvet floor. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more chilling tales. See you next time. The sun seemed afraid to rise over Durness Hall, leaving the air smelling of old rain and soot. Eleanor hadn't slept, haunted by the sound of footsteps on her balcony all night. When she finally looked, the balcony was empty, but on the velvet awning were wet, red footprints. There was no denying it. The ghost of Lady Rosalind Durness had returned. A knock at the door. It was the housekeeper, Mrs. Harrow, her face as gray as the morning. "The master asks for you," she said. Eleanor was surprised. "He can speak." "For a little while," Mrs. Harrow replied grimly. "The fever won't break." As they walked, a strange rhythmic tapping echoed from within the walls, a pulse following them through the house. They found Lord Durness drenched in sweat, his room heavy with the scent of medicine. "Eleanor," he whispered, his trembling hand grabbing hers. "The mirrors. You saw them?" "Yes," she said. "She's not gone. She lives through the house." He nodded. "Her spirit is bound to blood, and the blood to the house. She was betrayed here. Murdered." Eleanor's breath caught. "Murdered?" He looked away, ashamed. "I was a coward. The Durness name needed heirs, and Rosalind couldn't give me one. I left her alone on that balcony, and when I came back, she was lying below. The wind carried her blood into the velvet. It never washed away." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes. "Then the curse was born from my sin," he finished, "and it won't rest until I confess. Find her diary in my desk. Burn it before the next moon, or she will have you too." He coughed, a smear of blood on his lips. "Forgive me, Rosalind." And then his eyes went still. As the clock struck a mournful noon, Mrs. Harrow confirmed the worst. "It is done." Eleanor told her about the diary. "He said to burn it." The housekeeper's face darkened. "Then you must find it quickly." In the library, amidst dusty letters, Eleanor found a slim, red leather book, the diary of Lady Rosalind Durness. She opened it. The first entries were elegant, talking of her husband's absence and the house whispering. But the words grew darker. "I found a stain on the velvet of the balcony, a dark patch like a rose. The house is hungry." Rosalind wrote of sleepless nights, of mirrors that breathed. Then came a chilling confession, written in a trembling hand. "He will not forgive me. I have taken what he desired most, a child, but not his. The house knows. It watches me." A child. There had been a child. The final entry was stained with a drop of old blood. "The balcony calls. If I fall tonight, let it not be by his hand, but by the house's will." Suddenly, a gust of wind slammed the window open. As Eleanor clutched the diary, she saw Mrs. Harrow in the doorway. "You found it," the housekeeper said. "He said it must be burned." Mrs. Harrow shook her head. "That book cannot burn. The fire dies before it touches the pages." "Then what do I do?" Eleanor asked, terrified. Finish it, Mrs. Harrow replied. She left one page blank. The house won't sleep until her story is complete, but whoever writes the last line will belong to it. That night the house felt alive, the air heavy and thick. In the library, Eleanor sat with the diary open to its final blank page. Dipping her pen in ink, she began to write. October 12th, 1930. The house has waited for me. I am the echo of her memory, the blood of her sorrow. The ink bled across the page, turning crimson as if it were real blood. A crash echoed from the hall like shattering glass. Then a voice filled the air. Eleanor, come to me. She fled the library, running down a corridor where painted eyes and portraits seemed to follow her. At the end of the hall, the balcony doors were wide open. There stood Lady Rosalind, her gown soaked in shadow, a jeweled dagger in her hand. Blood remembers, the ghost whispered. Blood repeats. Eleanor felt a sting and looked down. The diary had cut her palm, and her own blood was now seeping into the final page. The ghost's expression softened, her hand extended in an invitation. Eleanor's body moved against her will, closer and closer to the railing. Just then, a shout broke the trance. Miss Vale! Mrs. Harrow rushed in, snatching the diary away. The ghost shrieked and vanished. Eleanor collapsed, trembling. She almost had you, Mrs. Harrow whispered. The house nearly took you. Eleanor could barely speak. It's not over, is it? No, the housekeeper said, her voice heavy with sorrow. It never ends until the bloodline does. She looked out at the moonlit courtyard. And you, Miss Vale, are the last of it. Thank you for watching this chilling tale. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories that lurk in the shadows. See you next time. The morning after that dreadful night, Durness Hall lay in utter silence. It was as if the entire house held its breath, waiting for something unspeakable to happen again. Eleanor woke on the drawing-room couch, her body stiff. The first thing she saw was Mrs. Harrow sitting beside her, the crimson diary still in her lap. You fainted, the housekeeper said quietly. The balcony nearly claimed you. Eleanor sat up, her head pounding. Where is the diary now? Mrs. Harrow looked toward the fireplace. Hidden, locked away in the chest behind the altar room. It must not be touched again. But the ghost, Eleanor said, her voice trembling. She called me by name. Mrs. Harrow's eyes were rimmed with sleeplessness. Of course she did. You are her blood. Eleanor froze. Her... What? The housekeeper rose. Your mother never told you who she was, did she? Lady Rosalind's child lived, Eleanor. The house did not consume her that night. You are her descendant. The revelation hit Eleanor like thunder. Her mother's quiet grief, her fear of storms, it all made a terrible sense. I don't believe you, she whispered. Then look at the portrait in the west corridor, said Mrs. Harrow. The truth stares from its eyes. The corridor seemed longer than before. At the far end stood a large portrait shrouded by a black veil. She hesitated only a moment before pulling the cloth away. Lady Rosalind stared back at her. The resemblance was undeniable. Eleanor's own eyes looked back at her. Same shape, same shade of gray-blue, same haunted sadness. Behind her, something creaked. She turned sharply. A door at the end of the hall had opened by itself. She stepped inside. It was the old mirror room. Dozens of mirrors lined the walls, each draped with heavy cloth. But one had been uncovered. A tall, gilt-framed-looking glass. Its surface gleamed faintly red. Eleanor's reflection seemed wrong. It blinked a moment after she did. Then the reflection smiled. Her real mouth did not move. Eleanor stumbled back, but the mirrored version stepped forward, pressing a ghostly hand against the inside of the glass. The surface rippled. A whisper echoed in her mind. Blood remembers. The reflection lifted its palm. and there, glowing faintly, was the same crimson mark Eleanor had seen on the velvet balcony. "No," she gasped. "You're not me." With a sickening crack, a fracture appeared across the mirror, then another and another, until the glass shattered outward. The face behind the fractures was no longer hers. It was Lady Rosalind. Her mouth opened in a silent scream. Shards rained down, falling in a perfect circle at Eleanor's feet. When she looked up, on the opposite wall, written in fresh blood, were the words, "The balcony waits for dawn." Hours later, Mrs. Harrow found her amidst the shards. "The mirrors are waking," Eleanor said faintly. Mrs. Harrow's hands shook. "Then it's begun. The final hour is coming. The blood debt must be paid." "What debt?" "The Durness men built this house on cruelty. Rosalind tried to break the curse with her death, but it only bound tighter. Now it falls to you, the last of her line." "But how?" "The diary holds the key," Mrs. Harrow whispered, "but if you open it again, it will take your soul." Eleanor shook her head. "Then I must risk it. I cannot live beneath her shadow forever." That night, a storm returned. Eleanor descended to the altar room and opened the iron chest. The crimson diary lay within, pulsing faintly. The moment she opened it, the pages began to turn on their own, stopping on a passage she hadn't read before. July the 16th. The balcony calls to me. He says the curse can be undone if I trade blood for truth. I fear it is a lie. Then a new line appeared, written in fresh crimson. "Only she who bears my blood may set me free." A drop of Eleanor's blood fell from her hand onto the page. The ink flared bright red and absorbed it. The candle went out. A voice filled the room, booming through the stone. "Come to the balcony, Eleanor. Let us end this together." The entire house came alive, guiding her toward the east wing. When she reached the balcony, lightning flashed. Lady Rosalind stood at the far end, her gown whipping in the wind. "You carry my sin," the ghost said. "It must end with you." Eleanor stepped forward, soaked and trembling. "Then tell me how." Rosalind extended her hand. "Join me." Eleanor looked down at the black void below. "If I die," she said, "the curse will pass to another." The ghost's expression faltered. "Then write the last line." Eleanor understood. The story had to be finished, not with death, but with truth. She drew out the diary, opened the final page, and wrote. Her blood was cursed, but her heart was not. Let her rest beneath the velvet balcony, and let no soul bear her sorrow again. The instant she finished, the wind stopped. The ghost looked at the page, then at Eleanor, her face filled with peace. "Thank you," she whispered, and dissolved into mist. When dawn broke, Mrs. Harrow found Eleanor standing by the railing. "It's over," Eleanor said softly. Mrs. Harrow gazed at her. "The curse sleeps, but you will always bear its mark." Eleanor looked at her palm. The cut had healed, leaving a faint crimson scar in the shape of a teardrop. Behind them, the velvet curtains swayed, and in the first light of morning, for just a moment, a shadow stood upon the balcony. A woman watching over her bloodline, finally at peace. Thank you so much for joining me on this chilling journey through Durness Hall. If you love tales of gothic horror and family curses, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from the shadows. See you next time. The storm had passed. In its wake, the moors lay washed clean, the air sharp with the scent of wet stone. Durness Hall stood silent under a gray sky. For the first time since I arrived, no whispers came from the walls. I wandered the corridors as if in a dream, my every step echoing, far too loud in the sudden profound quiet. The velvet curtains hung still, the mirrors were dark and lifeless. The house felt emptied of something. Its malice, perhaps, or its very soul. Mrs. Harrow found me in the great hall standing before the portrait of Lady Rosalind. Her painted eyes no longer followed me. "It's done," the housekeeper said, her voice a hushed whisper. I nodded, slowly. "She's gone." "Gone from this world, yes," she replied. "But her memory is stitched into the walls. The house has always remembered its dead." I turned toward the grand staircase. "Then I will leave it to remember without me." The week that followed was a blur of preparations. The villagers who had long whispered of Durness Hall's dark history came to help. They crossed the threshold with fear still flickering in their eyes, the story of the cursed balcony a shadow over their families for generations. But as they entered, nothing stirred. "Feels different," one of the men muttered, carrying out a piece of broken furniture. "Like the house is sleeping." I spent those days sorting through my uncle's affairs, finding letters written in his own hand, drafts of confessions he never sent. Each one ended the same way. "Forgive me, Rosalind." By the third day the house began to creak again, but not with menace. The old wood seemed to sigh as if exhaling after years of holding its breath. In the evenings I'd sit by the balcony with a candle, reading the final pages of the diary I had completed. The words no longer bled or shimmered. They lay calm and quiet on the paper, a wound finally closed. And yet, sometimes when the wind shifted just right, I thought I heard a faint whisper, almost gentle. "Thank you." One night, as the full moon rose pale over the moor, I woke to the sound of music. A piano, faint and distant, drifting through the halls. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and followed it. The melody was old, a waltz my mother used to hum long ago. It led me to the ballroom, a place I hadn't entered since that first terrible night. The double doors creaked open. Inside, the chandeliers flickered to life, one by one, casting a ghostly glow over the polished floor. Dust motes swirled like spectral dancers. And there, at the grand piano, sat a figure in white. Lady Rosalind. But this time her form wasn't ghastly. Her face was serene, her movements fluid. She turned as I entered and smiled, a human smile tender and free of torment. "You wrote the truth," she said softly. "The house no longer binds me." My eyes filled with tears. "Then why are you still here?" "I came to give thanks," the ghost replied, "and to leave you something." She rose, gliding across the floor, her hand extended, not cold, not solid, but gentle as light. When she touched my heart, a warmth spread through my chest like a spark catching life. "You bear my scar," Rosalind said, "but it is not a curse, it is remembrance. Do not fear it." I looked down at my palm. The faint crimson mark pulsed softly. "What will happen to the house?" I asked. "It will sleep," Rosalind whispered, "until it is needed again." The chandeliers dimmed. The music slowed. The ghost smiled once more, then stepped back toward the shadows. Her form shimmered, dissolving into silver dust that scattered on the wind. The piano fell silent. I stood alone in the vast ballroom, my breath steady, my fear finally gone. By autumn, Durness Hall was empty. Only I remained to lock the final door. I stood on the velvet balcony one last time, watching the fog roll in from the moors. The awning's color had faded to a soft rose. In my hands, I held the crimson diary. I didn't burn it. Instead, I placed it on the stone balustrade and let the wind carry its pages open. They fluttered, then lifted into the air, scattering like pale leaves. In the distance, thunder rumbled. Not with menace, but like a heartbeat beneath the sky. I whispered, "Rest now." Then I turned, walked through the silent hall, and closed the great doors of Durness Hall behind me. Years passed. The world changed, but Durness Hall remained, untouched by time. Ivy grew thick along its stone walls. Travelers passing at dusk would sometimes swear they saw a light in an upper window, or heard faint piano music on the fog. They'd speak of a woman's silhouette on the balcony, her gown pale as moonlight. But no one ever entered. for they said the house was not haunted, only watchful. And on quiet nights, those who dared to listen claimed they could hear a soft voice carried across the moors, a voice that spoke not of vengeance, but of peace. The blood has rested. The house remembers.